You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name and politics is our game, and we will be doing politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest State Senator Christine Radogno, who knows a lot about politics and public policy. She is in her 12th year in the General Assembly, 12th year in the State Senate. She came in the same year as Barack Obama, that little-known former state senator, in 1996. They were both elected. She served with him for 8 years, so we'll get her impressions of Barack Obama, the man, the politician, the presidential candidate. And we'll also be talking a lot about the issues of the day in the state legislature. Budget, money, dollars, the operating budget, but stay tuned, don't turn that dial. This is interesting stuff. A lot of personalities involved in that budget. There's Rod Blagojevich as sort of the uninvolved, unengaged state leader, governor. He flies down from time to time and looks in at the kids. I guess he might refer to it as the General Assembly, tucks them into bed and goes back to Chicago. And then you got Speaker Mike Madigan, who's been there almost 3 decades. He took a coffee break when he wasn't Speaker for 2 years, but other than that, he's been a fixture. Emil Jones, who was the mentor, many would say, and even Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you got the Republicans, Tom Cross, the minority leader in the State House, many would say a candidate for governor. He hasn't said that yet in 2010. And not to be forgotten, Frank Watson, the Senate caucus leader, Senate minority leader, Senate Republican leader. And most of all, you have Christine Radogno, who ran for state treasurer and outperformed everybody. That would be true. In 2006, at least all the Republicans in the statewide races, I would say yours was easily the closest race, right?
Mm-hmm. I believe it was.
Running against Alexi Giannoulias, who had a lot of money, a lot of dough, a lot of support from Barack Obama. But people want to know, they want to know from you, Christine Radogno, are you running for governor?
$20 million and I'm in.
But seriously, for 2010, could you do it, or is it just too much of a hurdle?
Well, I think the biggest hurdle is the financial piece of it. It certainly is an interesting job, and I think we've got a number of folks in the party taking a look at it, and you mentioned Tom Cross. Bill Brady has said that he's definitely out there. So
that's 2 right there, Cross and Brady, 2
right.
guys. Should there be a woman running? Is that an important issue?
I don't think gender is the most important issue, but it certainly, adds a little diversity to the ticket.
And it could help a lot. Not that people, it's kind of, how to say this, you're obviously well qualified, you obviously know the issues, you've had the experience, but sometimes it seems to help this year. It seems to help to some extent with Hillary Clinton that she is a woman, she has a major following, especially among more senior women who feel it's be good to have a woman who is qualified. It's the flip side of that, you have a person who's very qualified running against her, who's got enormous skills and talent in the name of U.S. Senator Barack Obama, but who is also African American, which helps in a tremendous base. There are African Americans who feel a lot of pride in voting for Barack Obama because he is so qualified and happens to be African American. I could flip that around and say there are a lot of women who feel a lot of pride in voting for Hillary Clinton. We're talking Democrats, because she is so qualified in their view and she happens to be a woman. So if we flip it around to, there would be a lot of women in the state of Illinois who'd feel very proud to vote for somebody who's very qualified like Christine Radogno and who happens to be a woman. You see the point? See where I'm going?
I see where you're going.
Does that mean you're running? You're in 2010?
Well, no, I'm not making any commitments.
You're not ready for that.
We have quite a job between now and 2010 to.
But you would look at it, seriously.
Sure, I would not rule anything out.
And it is a financial issue. You have to look
Very
at that
much
and
so.
say, how
Very
can you
much
raise
so.
that much money?
Right.
All right, we mentioned, we'll kick back and tell people a little bit more about you, but we have said you 12 years in the state Senate, and you did run for treasurer in 2006, so you know something about what that takes, running statewide. you did know Barack Obama for 8 years in the state Senate. You were serving in the state chamber, same chamber in the General Assembly, different parties. I'm sure you had occasion to speak with the man.
Right, we served on some committees together.
Right, and so we talked a little bit about this before, but now what's in the news, and we should say we're taping this because it may change what's in the news when you're watching it, but we're taping it on March 30th. You'll see it a week later in the suburbs. You'll see it 2 weeks later in the city of Chicago and Aurora. You may see it much sooner if you go to Public Affairs with Jeff Berkowitz on YouTube, because you'll see there are 30 or so shows, and this will be up there, so you can see it before it airs. But as of March 30th, Christine Radogno, is Barack Obama credible on the pastor disaster, his relationship with Jeremiah Wright? Do you think he's credible in terms of what happened and how he's treated that, and how he has either demonstrated leadership or not in dealing with that issue?
Well, I think that issue is very troublesome for him. Barack is clearly a talented, intelligent individual. But when we look at electing a president, we look beyond just your innate intelligence and your knowledge of the issues. You have to look to character and judgment as well. And I think more than anything, the issue with the pastor and also with his association with Tony Rezko, some information coming out recently about his association with William Ayers, who was a radical in the 60s.
In the 60s, in the Weatherman, right?
Right. And, you put that all together, and then, for me, a red flag goes up. It's like, what kind of judgment is there? Now, he did respond to the pastor issue in a speech, and
Big
that
speech.
probably is his best medium, the best way. He's at his best when he's giving a speech. We saw that at the Democratic National Convention. He did a really good job with the speech itself. So when
Prepared comments,
performing, he's
good.
good.
He knows the cadence, he knows
Right.
how to connect. He looks in a very different way than Bill Clinton, who Barack Obama connects, right?
Right. But even as late as last week, he was still defending the pastor. So that brings me back to his actions are not the same as his words. I mean, he's condemning that kind of thing, yet at the same time, he's still defending it, which is troublesome to me.
Is he trying to put it in perspective and put what goes on? I don't know if he's saying that, but a lot of his supporters, certainly liberal Democrats, are saying America as a whole may not understand African Americans, and they don't understand black churches, and I don't know who said this, but it's a well-known saying that there's no more segregated hour in the United States than the Sunday church hour, when white people go to one church and black people go to another, and perhaps Hispanics go to another, and of course people who are Jewish should go to synagogue on a different day. But that's the saying, is that even if we've become a more integrated society, when people go to church, it tends to be fairly segregated. I mean, is that right, number one? And is that an issue here? Well, is that right, and is that an issue here?
Well, I think it probably is correct. However, I've heard a number of even black ministers saying that what went on in that particular church is not typical. And, to the extent when you listen to those comments, they were so hateful and so just bitter and angry. I just can't imagine any context where that's appropriate at all.
Well, but he has been there for 30 or so years, Pastor Wright. These things have been shown as they are these days. It's a visual, so it's not just hearing or reading the words, it's seeing it. And so there are 3 or 4 primary things that were, some would say, taken out of context, shown on TV. They don't represent what the man has done for 30 years, what Pastor Wright has done in terms of hope, in terms of reaching out, in terms of helping people. Indeed, a story was told about a white person, I can't remember his name, but he wrote a story about this, who was engaged to marry an African American. They were going to that church, and the woman decided she would break it off because the racial hurdle was too great. Pastor Wright counseled her and the man to get married.
Well, I'm sure he has some good qualities.
Doesn't sound like a racist if you did that, right? I mean,
excuse that kind of rhetoric. I mean, it was inciting hate, and that is just wrong, and it's wrong for someone to associate with
inciting
people like
hate.
that.
What would be what's the rhetoric that's inciting hate that sticks out? Anything in particular?
Goddamn the United States of America. I mean,
not God bless America, but goddamn America.
Right. I mean, there's just no excuse for that.
KKK of America.
And in addition to the particular sermons that we've heard played a number of times, now who knows what was in some that we hadn't heard, the church publication also has a pattern of that kind of anti-European, anti-Semitic.
Anti-middle class. They don't want blacks to be a part of the middle
Right.
class because there's something that's different.
So
they
there's
think.
definitely a theme there. I mean, this is not an isolated incident. And then, as I pointed out, it's not just about the pastor, but it's about the judgment of an individual who associates not only with a pastor like that, but with Tony Rezko, with William Ayers, who endorses Todd Stroger for Cook County president. You know, there's a disconnect between the wonderful rhetoric that we hear in a prepared speech and the actual execution of these different relationships.
Well, we'll get onto the broader issue, but one last thing, just going back to the black churches, which I mentioned. I mean, people talk about African Americans in this country having a relationship or a lineage back to slavery, having a lineage back to dealing with Jim Crow, having a lineage back to dealing with many parts, if not all parts of the country, where blacks were clearly separate and not equal, okay, turning that phrase around. And so that's there, and a minister on Sunday or a pastor is trying to motivate, to give hope, to excite, to overcome all of this. And Barack Obama in his speech said this. He said, the thing about Wright is that he missed the greatness and goodness of America. He said his was a static view, not a dynamic view. He saw the negatives in the past, but he didn't see what change had occurred in America. And indeed, Obama said, only in America could somebody with Obama's background, with much of the discrimination that would relate to that background, to having a father from Kenya who's black, a mother from Kansas who is white, a lot of discrimination against anybody who was biracial, by people who were both black and white. So he said, only in America could somebody with his story become a presidential candidate. So Obama recognizes that, the greatness of America. You don't dispute that, right?
No, I mean, it's a great line, and he was articulate in the speech.
And it's true. I think he believes it. You know that, I know that, and everybody
I
watching
think
this who knows
that's
Barack
probably
Obama
true.
knows that. It's a sincere statement.
But I still go back to the issue of judgment, and it speaks to one's character to associate long-term with folks like that.
Even if, I mean, he would say he raised the issue of his grandmother. Some would say in the speech he threw his grandmother under the bus because he said, acknowledging that his grandmother, who was white, raised him in large part, and said something to the effect that she loved him more than life herself. He acknowledged what she had done, but yet he referred to some of the racial and racist feelings that his grandmother had, and said he could not disassociate himself from his grandmother, because he probably he didn't say it, but maybe he did. They loved her so much. So
I
because
heard the speech.
So because of those points, he couldn't dissociate himself from his grandmother's family because of some negative racial comments. He couldn't do the same thing with Wright. He's almost family. He's saying he would counsel him.
But he's not. I mean, he's not family.
And now he's hinted that he did have conversations with Wright, and he did back off in those conversations. That's only in the last few days, I think, that we've heard about that. Okay, so there's that. There's the Wright. There's associating in the purchase of his was offered as a $1.95 million house. I think he got for 1.6, and then associating with Rezko or his wife buying a side lot. And he's described himself as a boneheaded move, but you're saying that's no excuse. That's bad judgment.
Yes, it's bad judgment. It was well known he was under investigation at that point. Tony Rezko was. And so, certainly myself being in the political world, when you know an individual like that is being investigated, I mean, it is just terrible judgment to associate with them and certainly enter into a financial transaction. That's terrible judgment.
Although there's no hint that Rezko in any way got any benefit about that. And he's himself said, everybody.
Well, he's about peddling influence.
But have you ever met Tony Rezko?
No.
No. But not only a lot of other Democrats, but many Republicans have met him, dealt with him. He's probably contributed money to both over the 20 years he's been in Illinois politics.
Bet you anything that since the investigation's been going on, there are plenty of people that would not be comfortable taking money from him or taking support from him.
Yeah, but I don't know that he's been taking money, I don't know that Barack took money from Tony since the investigation.
I don't know the timing.
Because over the
of
years
campaign.
You're right, about $250,000,
Right.
counting back his state Senate days, U.S. Senate. And the trouble thing people might acknowledge is that it turns out it's more than Barack initially had
Right.
committed to.
Right.
He was squabbling with the press about, they said it was 160, he said 60. He's now conceded it's closer to $250,000
Right.
over the course of 17 years or so.
And help with the house purchase. That's bad
The
judgment.
help is that seems like the only help is the comfort of knowing that you know the person who's developing a side lot. It's not like he is not
And
sad.
will be willing to sell a piece of the side lot to you, and will be willing to pay full price for the side lot when you could pay less for the house.
But he said the house was on the market for a while, and there were other.
You know, you can.
There were no other
right.
people for the side lot. There was another buyer, so they had to pay the full price.
Just like, you know, the speech was good about Reverend Wright. I'm looking, you know, for
Okay.
50,000 feet, the general impression is there's some concern about the judgment here.
Bad judgment,
Yeah.
bad leadership.
my view,
and
yes.
bad leadership, not what you want in a president. So does that, and we'll get on to the other subject, but does that, in your view, hurt him? You know, when Barack Obama ran for the U.S. Senate in 2004, one of the things he said, he may be rooted in the African-American community, but he's not limited by it. And he said he was going to be competitive in every demographic, old, young, white, black, high-income, middle-income, so forth. Every demographic across the state, and I think he was. In the Democratic primary, where he had more challenges than in the general election, is what he said in the primary. So now he has a bit of a demographic problem, it seems like, with white men, right? Certainly, and lower income blacks, but does this hurt him with white men? That's a pretty big demographic to have a problem with as you run for president of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in presidential electoral politics, so, you know, I'm sure their campaign's keeping an eye on that.
All right, so going over, that's the backdrop, and it does tie in a little bit with the Illinois Republican Party and which you're focusing on in terms of you're returning this week to the state legislature
Correct.
of Springfield. People would say the Democratic Party, although they have they have the governor's mansion, they have a veto-proof majority in the Senate. You know, 37 to 22. You're outnumbered
Right.
pretty well. In the House, it's 67 to 51. In the State House, in favor of the Democrats. So with all of this, they can't seem to get together. They can't seem to pass a budget. Last year, they went into the next year, I think.
We passed it in August, finally.
August.
And it should have been passed.
But the session went on really to the end of the
Well,
year.
as we still call all those special sessions to order. So
Yeah,
we're still,
in it. And
in
so
it.
they finally got it resolved as to the RTA issue.
Mm-hmm.
But with all of that going on, as you go back now, people were saying, oh, the Republicans really don't have a chance. Obama's going to be on the ballot. He's so popular. You're going to lose more seats in the State House, more in the State Senate. You'll obviously, they would say, lose the U.S. Senate, or Durbin will keep his Senate seat. There's no hope for the Republican Party in 2008. What do you say to those folks as you return to the General Assembly
not
this
so
week?
fast, not so fast. You know, I do think that we will not lose any more seats in the Illinois State Senate. I think people are looking at the fact there's a couple of open seats. In other words, we've had some retirements. And what happened in the previous election cycle, which was, again, a Democratic wave, we lost some of those open seats. I don't think that will happen this time. Bill Peterson is one that's retiring, and Todd Sieben is another that's retiring. So I think we'll hang on to those seats. We will be trying to pick up a couple of seats. We will be using the backdrop that you've just described, where you've got a total dysfunction and lack of leadership in the Democratic Party such that very little can get done. Now, the challenge is to help people understand that even though they like their individual senator or state representative, having that kind of lack of partisan balance and those individuals voting for the leaders that we currently have, or the so-called leaders, is not helpful. So that's the message we need to get out, that to the extent these folks are up, they are part of the problem.
Yeah, so what is the problem? Tell the viewers in a nutshell, as you return to the General Assembly this week, what's the problem? What are you trying to work out and what can't be worked out? What does the state legislature need to do, and how does it affect the folks watching this program?
Well, from my view, everything in the state government comes down to the budget. That's how you fund your priorities. If you can say something is a priority, but if you don't fund it, it really isn't. So it's really all about the budget. The main job the legislature has to do is pass the budget for the next year, which will fund education, health care, transportation, public safety. Then we can also talk about the capital bill in a moment, which is money for roads and bridges.
So what's the problem in funding those issues? Everybody says they're important.
Well, one, there's a finite amount of money, and everyone argues over, who gets what. Now, it's a particularly challenging year. It's challenging when you have a lot of money to divide up, but it's really challenging when your resources are very limited. The budget that was passed last year is $750 million out of balance.
There's a deficit in last year's budget, the thing you're living
right.
with this year.
That's
Okay.
right.
And that's before you get to
Before
the budget
we even
you're
start
going
to own
for next year.
Right.
When the fiscal 09 starts when?
It starts in July.
Starts in July, so, and if you don't get a budget, if to pass legislation relating to the budget, by the end of May, the Democrats only need a majority, and they certainly have that. They really don't need Republicans, they might want it. But after May 30th, or what is May 30th, whatever at the end of May is.
May 31st.
May 31st.
Yeah. They do need.
They need 60%, right? And then they, technically they don't need Republicans in the Senate because they got 60%, but in the House, then you folks become players.
Right.
So does that happen? Does it go past May 31st?
I cannot envision this thing winding up by May 31st, having actually been in some of the meetings where they're talking about the budget and the lack of progress that I've seen to date in those meetings. I mean, to the point where one of the things that the governor did with the 08 budget is veto out member projects from the House Democrats and the Senate Republicans. One of the things that's being said now is there's no way that the House Democrats are going to engage in the budget discussion at all unless their member initiatives are restored.
So they'll hold out for that.
Right. Well, the problem is we already have a deficit of $750 million. That clearly
That's another
would
200
add
million or so?
more. Right.
Yeah.
Well, then, if 3 caucuses get their member projects, I mean, maybe it ought to be even across the board. My view
that
of
would
what
be
we
the
ought
Senate
to do.
Republicans also lost theirs, so. Yeah.
Well, the other alternative that actually makes more sense, given the resources we have,
Take it away from everybody?
take it away from everybody.
That would give you another 200 million. So
Well, probably another 400 million. So we're start to reduce that deficit.
For this last year,
right,
and then also going
right.
forward.
And it is
And
true
as
there.
governor, if you were governor, would you suggest that?
I sure would. I mean,
No more member initiatives for anybody, Democrat or Republican?
Absolutely. And we've got ways to get money to local communities that doesn't go through that process. A good example is the OSLAD fund, the Open Land Acquisition Fund. There's a process, an application process. Every park district that is eligible is able to apply for it. There's criteria, there's a local match. So if we find we need park district money, set up a program like that. If we find we need fire trucks, set up a program like that. You know, there are basically categories of member initiatives, and they ought to go through the budget process in a fair and even-handed way.
Now, the governor gave his speech, I guess, on February 20th, State of the State, State of the Budget. He said, simple, let's lease the lottery. That'll give us a pile of dough. Let's securitize the tobacco settlements, that is give up future revenue for current revenue. You get a big lump sum payment, raise the tax on casino revenue to 70%. Tax those mean employers who don't provide adequate health care, and then use that money for low-income people who don't get health care. A few pension bond schemes, he would say, proposals. Right. That's right. You do all that, folks, and there's no problem. We can all be home at the end of April, right?
Right, if we did all those things.
What's the problem? Why not do that?
You know, to give the governor credit, and I don't do that lightly, some of the things that he's proposing, if they were in the context of a good financial plan and good management, might make some sense. I mean, pension bonds are being used by a number of states. We did a round of them a few years ago. Actually, his proposal to sell the lottery, the way it's described, where he sets aside about $5 billion rather, to create a trust fund to replace the revenue.
For education, so education doesn't lose any money.
Correct.
So you could buy into the lottery lease, is that what you're saying?
Well, I think those are financial tools that could make some sense if you had the other side of the equation, where you had a leader who was controlling spending and saying, we're really going to use this money, we're going to take that pension money and fix the pensions, not do these things for budget relief so that he can just start a whole bunch of new programs.
What do you do to fix the pensions?
Well, pension bonding would be one issue. Now, long term, I think we're going to have to go to a 2-tiered system.
Which would be?
Which would be newer employees coming in will not necessarily have the same benefits as those that are there today.
So you can reduce your future obligations as a way of lessening the burden on
Right,
the remainder of the state.
long term.
Long term.
But the only way to fix the pension issue is to be disciplined about funding the pension obligation and not spending that money that's supposed to be going into the pensions on other programs.
So Governor Radogno, does your proposal include reductions in spending as well? Are there
We
cuts
don't
in
even
spending
need to
or cuts in
we
rates of
don't
growth?
need to cut spending. What we need to do is not expand beyond the revenue that comes in. The state generally, and this year's a little different because the economy's a little slow, generally we get about $1 billion a year, brand new money, just because
This
of
year
inflation.
probably
and so.
maybe
This
half
year
a
will
billion.
be more challenging.
Maybe at best
Right.
500 million, maybe less than that.
I think
right?
we're talking 650 is the last I
Okay.
heard. So,
It
you know,
could be
it
less,
is a
yeah.
challenge.
Yeah.
So
So you have to cut the may have to cut the rate of growth of spending.
exactly, and there's ways to do that. I mean, you can look at the Medicaid program, which takes up 31% of our budget. That is a huge
Growing
chunk.
about at 8% a year, is that right?
Exactly.
And what do you do to cut
We
Medicaid?
rein in the costs.
How do you rein
One,
in
we
costs?
stop expanding eligibility, which the governor has, not expanded this All Kids program. We tighten up on the eligibility requirements. For example, we check to make sure that people who are in the program are income qualified. There was actually a report that demonstrated 27% of the people in the program are not income qualified.
Are making more than should make.
That's
than-
right.
than they're making more than would make them eligible for the program.
That's right.
So you kick them out, reduce your cost.
Right. You use managed care to deliver the services more efficiently. So you've got to control that spending.
What about gaming? Is there a place for additional casinos as a way of financing this capital budget?
Well, there is, I believe, consensus, and I actually did vote for a land-based Chicago casino. When I came in the
So you
legislature,
would continue to support that?
I would.
And there's a 10th license that should be
and
issued?
that could be it. It could be the 10th license.
What about a
to make
South
land-based.
Suburban casino? Yeah, you could break Emil Jones' heart if you say no on this. You don't want to do that to Emil Jones, right?
The only
Senate president, he says, what kind of,
yeah.
can't get any respect around
Well,
here.
the only sense that makes is you pick up the people going over to Indiana. But the problem is the people going over to Indiana are going for a couple of reasons. One, you can smoke there, which has actually
You
hurt
can't
our
smoke
revenue
here.
here.
Right. So,
Even though I
but
support
at the end of the
smoking
day,
ban.
South Suburban Casino, would you give Jones that?
I could do that.
Waukegan? North.
That's, I
North
think,
End?
South Suburban
That's it.
because of the
Cut it
Indiana
off.
factor in Chicago.
Then that way you get more money for roads and bridges and school construction, all that stuff, right?
If you dedicated it to that.
We're going to continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank our guest, State Senator Christine Radogno, for coming here. Thanks so much, Christine.
Oh, thanks. Good to be
And we
here.
hope you come back. She is, of course, in the area southwest suburbs, LaGrange, Darien, Burridge, Lemont, Mokina, Western Springs, Homer Glen, and other areas.
New Lenox,
New
Frankfurt,
Lenox,
yeah.
okay. So, and you've been there 12 years, double degree from Loyola University, was a social worker, and knows a lot, and we need you back because there's a lot we haven't discussed.
Right.
But fix in 1 minute, tell us how we fix the state GOP. In major, major trouble. We talked about how they have minorities in all the chambers. You don't seem to have a governor candidate for 2010.
Well, I think there
You
is
may be
some
losing
interest.
races in the 14th. You've lost the congressional
The
district
congressional
seat.
races,
You may
yeah,
be the
yeah,
10th.
yeah.
But what do you do to fix the state GOP? Do you need major reform?
Well, yeah, I mean, we need to really build the farm team, get people interested
Do
in
you
running
need to get rid of the
statewide.
Illinois Combine? Do you need to say Bob Schulander, you're done? Anybody related to the
You know,
Combine?
I
We're
think
no longer going
that's
to be doing that?
almost irrelevant at
It's
this
not relevant?
point.
Schlander's irrelevant?
I think he's irrelevant.
Is there an Illinois
at this
Combine?
point.
Is John
Yes,
Cass right?
I believe he is. John
What is the
Cass.
Illinois Combine?
Oh, Jim Thompson's part of it. This wholesale of Wrigley Field, I think, is.
Democrats
you
and
see that-
and Republicans
sure,
working
you
together
see
for the
that all-
benefit of others, not for the people? Is that what you'd say?
Yeah,
Is that the Illinois Combine?
yeah. I mean, I think they just like the art of the deal.